Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Brad, this is Q Branch Woodworks, and today we are going to talk about the price of this egg. Now, just to be clear about what this egg is and is not, it is not something that we can project all of our political hopes, dreams, aspirations, and negativity onto. What it is, however, is a turned box that uses 3D printed threads. Now, this is the first time that I'm using the material PETG for these threads. This will become important later because PETG is not as slippery as PLA is. Now, if these letters don't mean anything to you right now, don't worry about it. If you're not a 3D printer, don't worry about that either. I think you'll understand the drama when it comes up later. For now, let's just focus on the early part of this process, which is getting stuff round. So what I've selected for this project is sapele, and I'm using a spindle roughing gouge to remove all of the corners. Next, I use a diamond parting tool to establish tenons on both ends of the blank. I also like to check my work with dividers to make sure that I'm right about at the right size. Next, I use an extremely thin parting tool to part this box, give or take in half. I never part all the way through because that's how you cause accidents and get your tool pinched, so I use a saw to separate the top and the bottom halves. From here, it's time to start preparing what will eventually become the top of the box. I'm not going to talk too much about the individual techniques that I'm using here because this isn't really a video about how to make a regular old box. If you'd like to see a video on how to make a regular old end grain box at some point, I'm more than happy to provide one. Right now though, I'm just preparing this portion of the box so that I can slot a threaded insert inside it. After establishing a rough diameter with my dividers, I'm using my parting tool to cut the recess that the threaded insert will sit in. Again, this is not an endorsement of how to use the parting tool. I don't think this is a particularly safe way to do it. That said, this is the best tool that I have for the job, and it's been working okay for me so far. The dimension that I'm concerned with here is the width of the threaded insert. I'm not quite worried about depth yet. Once I get the interior of the box mostly hollowed out, then I can start to think about the actual depth that the threads will sit. I don't want any protrusion here. I don't want these things sitting above the surface. The only problem with this configuration is that it makes it difficult to get the threads back out of the box once you've set them in there. So I use the other threads, screw them in, and use that to pull the entire assembly back out. Now it's just time for a little bit of fine-tuning, a little bit of sanding, and then we can start working on the other half of the box. Now for the second half of the box, I obviously do want the threads to protrude on this side. The process will remain much the same though. I use my dividers to measure the approximate width of the threaded insert that I'm going to be using, and then transfer that to the box, cut a shallow recess, and then test my fit frequently to make sure that it's nice and tight. Once I'm fairly sure that I have my fit correct, it's time to glue these inserts in. Today, for your gluing pleasure, I will be using Starbond Adhesive's 5-minute epoxy. Hot tip when using this stuff, make a bigger hole in the tips so you don't have to stress yourself like this. There we go. Nice. This stuff is generally pretty easy. Mix up part A and part B in a small container, and then I'm using the back of a paintbrush to apply it to the surface. Once you have your epoxy spread all the way around, it's time to insert your inserts. Don't be afraid to use a little bit of gentle persuasion if that's what it takes. After just a little more gentle persuasion, I'll go ahead and leave these for an hour or two to make sure that the epoxy sets up, and then it's time for a quick test fit of the threads. I've given some thought as to how you can achieve a perfect grain match on these boxes using these 3D printed threaded inserts, and I'll reveal it in a later video. Mostly because it just doesn't matter here. I'm going to do so much to the outside of this box that you're never going to be able to tell what the initial grain alignment was anyway. Now here, I'm just cleaning a little bit of the epoxy squeeze out off of the inside, and then I've decided to make this portion of the box just a little bit deeper. I think it's important to be flexible when you're designing and actually producing boxes like this. Listen to what the wood is telling you, listen to what the design is telling you. Don't be afraid to deviate from your plans a little bit to get something that looks better in the end. Now, after a little bit of light sanding, it is time to start shaping the outside profile of this box. I can tell you that when I moved the tailstock up here, I didn't actually know what I was going to do. I just sort of started cutting, and what this wound up looking like was an egg. Guess I've had eggs on the brain recently. Go figure. Here, I'm just using a spindle gouge to get the rough shape into place. Now, as I get closer to the end of this portion of the shaping, you can probably tell that this is not a perfect egg shape, and again, now that I know what I'm going to do, it just really doesn't matter that much, so I'm not putting a ton of effort into getting a perfectly smooth surface here. Now, because this box is held together with threads, I can do stuff and make cuts that I would never dream of with a box that was just done with a friction fit, like that cut right there. Next, I'll just do a little bit of light sanding with some 120, and then a little bit of shape refinement, and then a little bit more sanding. I actually do this somewhat frequently. I convince myself that my shape is okay, and then once I start sanding, I realize that I don't actually care for it, and I have to go back and touch it up again. Chalk it up to good old-fashioned impatience. Next, it's time to actually lay this egg. Now, here, I think I'm going to come up with a very clever solution, and I'll be proven wrong almost immediately. I mean, I really thought this was going to work. I thought I was being quite clever here. Turns out, not that clever, so I'm going to go ahead and cut and sand the bottom manually. My plan this far has been basically turn an egg and then carve it. Now I have to come up with all the pesky details, like what's it actually going to look like, and how am I going to texture the surface this time. I'm going to leave this cut a little bit longer so you can see some of the fits and starts that happen here. I think that it's important to recognize that these ideas don't often just kind of fall out of the sky or fall out of your head directly onto the piece. There's a lot of back and forth and a lot of erasing that happens. It's also okay to second guess your design before you make your first cut. In fact, I'd strongly encourage it. I'm hoping that the skill of visualizing in 3 dimensions comes more naturally to me in the future after I give it some practice. Right now I find it quite a challenge, but I find that drawing things out helps me a little bit at least. I went back and forth a couple of times on some designs that were maybe sort of floral, maybe kind of look like snake skin. Nothing was really striking me. At this point in the process, I pretty much just draw some lines, make some intersections, and try to connect them in interesting ways and see what strikes me. Once I start to get the hint of a shape that I like, it seems to flow downhill. I know, it feels like a long way to go to arrive at a spiral, but this is how the creative process works sometimes. Iterate, simplify, see where you wind up. And now it's time to just jump right in and make that first cut. I'll be starting off with the rotary chisel as usual. Once again, I love the rotary chisel because it allows me to make nice, deep, relatively straight cuts, but it also gives me just enough flexibility to take gradual curves as well. This egg is going to have 8 major spiraled sections. As I look at the top here, I think I maybe could have pushed this to 12, but ultimately I think that I get good separation with 8. I think that the pattern is well defined enough that it looks good both at a distance and up close. Now I'm going to swap over to my rotary bits to start to remove a little bit of the material on either side of the rotary chisel cuts. As usual, when the work gets repetitive, sometimes it's really nice to just throw on a nice set of headphones and listen to some good music. Today's selection, Fragments by Bonobo. I've seen Simon Green, aka Bonobo, perform live a couple of times, and I consider it an absolute privilege. If you guessed that the rotary burrs were coming out next, congratulations, you've done it. I've been really enjoying this texture lately, and I still feel like I'm figuring out the rules and some of the sort of finer points of the application of this pattern. It's difficult to do things like control the depth, control the actual heat that's happening inside the cone of the burr. There are just a lot of very small sort of facets to carving this pattern that it takes a little while to figure out, and so I figured this was another great opportunity to just play with it a little bit. The general idea for this version of the pattern is that I'm going to have some big dots on the most raised areas, and then as I move down into the troughs, the dots will get smaller and smaller. I also plan for the bigger dots on the top of the topography to be bigger around the widest portion of the egg. Hopefully this will lead to an interesting visual effect both in the vertical and the horizontal dimensions. And this is the part that takes a few days. I like to get up a couple of hours before my young boys get up and just go ahead and knock some of this out in the shop. When I'm doing these kinds of projects, I come in every morning smelling like burnt mahogany or burnt sapele, and I'm sure that they wonder what's going on with Dad. as I move both up and down this piece, I'm basically just swapping out to a slightly smaller burr every time that I make a full revolution on the piece. Because the spirals aren't spaced as widely at the top, I want to make sure that I can get a really fine and dense pattern with these cut burrs up there. Here I'm just starting to sort of fill in some of the gaps around the equator though. this is just sort of what the process looks like from the outside. A fan going, a dust collector going, my own personal protection going, and just a maniac hunched over an egg at like 5:30 in the morning. It's not glamorous, but this is where I like to think all of the cool stuff actually happens. In a garage, tucked away somewhere in a workshop when nobody else is awake. Now here the carving starts to get really fine, and this is where the process starts to drag. I wound up spending 2 or 3 days on each size of the burrs once I get down into the 3 to 4 millimeter range. If you're interested in picking up some of these burrs on your own, I will have some affiliate links in the description below. Please feel free to check them out. After a quick brushing with some nylon, I think we're starting to see what this thing is going to wind up looking like. The nylon brush is just to remove a lot of the carbon and the soot that gets built up and make sure that I haven't left any areas unburnt or unburred. Next, to achieve uniformity of color, I'm going to be using this Speedball India ink. I also just happen to have a lot of it, so I'm going to try to use it all up probably sometime in the next year. This is also a shellac-based ink, so it'll do some to protect the wood underneath. This is also the beginning of my biggest panic moment that I've had in the shop in a little while. So right around here, I'm starting to feel rather smug that this piece is going extremely well. The entire thing is black. I love the way the pattern has turned out. I love the way the spiral has turned out, and I set it down to dry for a bit. And then I can't get it back open. This is the next morning, and look, I'm not a small guy. I'm, 6'3", 200 pounds with some strength behind it, and I, for the life of me, and some latex gloves, cannot get this thing back open.
This is dumb.
Now, even though this is a silly problem to have, I'm actually pretty proud of this solution. I decided to pour some denatured alcohol into the seam. My idea was that maybe the shellac from the India ink had actually glued the seam of this piece together, had somehow worked its way in, so I dumped a whole bunch of this denatured alcohol onto the piece to try to loosen things up a little bit. When it doesn't work the first couple of times, the panic starts to set in a little bit harder, and here I'm just looking at my hand, seeing all of this India ink come back off and wondering if I've completely botched this piece. It was really difficult to watch something that I'd spent this many hours on literally sort of bleeding off onto a paper towel. Unfortunately, this is the best idea I had for how to get this thing back open, so I figured I would just keep saturating and keep saturating and keep saturating, and eventually something had to give. Then I thought, well, if it's extra sticky, what I really need is longer levers to maximize the force that I can apply with my hands. My bare hands weren't getting it done, so I thought maybe some soft clamps might help me out. At this point, I wasn't even that worried about damaging the piece. I just knew that if I couldn't get it back open, that there really wasn't much of a point in continuing the project. Finally, after letting things soak for about an hour and several more reapplications of the denatured alcohol...
No.
Thank God. Alright. Oh, wow. Okay. I was pretty sure I was cooked. Sorry, the audio's not great, but yeah, look, it did start to bleed. Oh, that's so interesting. So my best guess is that the shellac in the India ink bled in between all of these various points here, like bled into the seam, Like you can see a little bit right here and right here. And I think that actually glued it closed. Oh man. I was legitimately starting to panic a little bit there. I really didn't think I was gonna get this thing to come apart. And then it's just a dumb old egg, right? So I don't mean to tempt fate here immediately, but I do need to make sure that this thing will go back into alignment. Okay, we're gonna give that a minute to dry up. That was legitimately scary. Dang, okay. Wow, my hands hurt. Oh, I'm so glad that came apart. Okay, I didn't know what I was gonna do. Just take a second, just breathe a little bit, you know? Just enjoy the fact that this is currently not completely stuck together. All right. I think what I might wind up doing is just adding a very thin layer of wax in between the two pieces, just so that doesn't happen anymore. I do, like, what was cool about this was that the seam was completely invisible, right? Like the seam, you couldn't see it. I sure couldn't see it to even find out where it was supposed to come apart. I think that's very cool. I'd be willing to sacrifice just like a tiny little bit of that in order to make sure that it doesn't stay stuck. So I might apply a very, very, very thin layer. Yeah, very thin layer of wax, I think is the move. I think I might also wax the threads on the box too, just to make sure. I was having a little bit of trouble with these PETG threads. Definitely, just whatever that material is a little bit stickier. That the PLA tends to run past itself really quickly, really easily, and the PETG was giving me some issues. So just to avoid all of that, I think I'm just gonna add some wax to every part. No kidding, my heart is pounding right now. I really didn't think that I was gonna be able to get this thing back apart. Okay, let's resume the video. It's nice when I don't have to manufacture drama for you two. When it just happens naturally and I freak out about the status of my piece. What kind of lubricant can I safely use here? I might just go with a little bit of beeswax actually. That seems safest. All natural, low melting point. Feels like the move. And I don't know how chemically resistant PETG actually is. So I am still gonna be careful because I might have to go back and refinish this box a little bit. Because I definitely pulled some of the black ink off of it. Might even need to finish the inside all black as well. Okay, see, that's not quite aligned. That sounds better. That's not quite it. Am I just losing my mind now? What is going on? Okay, so now the beeswax won't let it close. Cool. All right. I do see some sawdust caked in down here at the bottom. I don't think that was what did it, but probably not helping. If I'm feeling dangerous, there is a point at which this does align perfectly. Lovely. You know what I think that's gonna have to do? Seam is still here. Let's get proper focus here. The seam is still pretty much invisible. The box will actually open. Okay. Oh man. So I think the move now. Well, I don't want to paint this surface because it's gonna be thick, so it's gonna mess up the alignment. So I'm gonna have to oil the interior. Okay, that's the move. Okay, so I oil the interior because that shouldn't leave enough of a film to compromise that. It should actually make these two surfaces slide past each other a little bit better. Okay, yes, I'm feeling much better about the plan all of a sudden. Okay, so we're gonna go a little bit on the inside here. Roll that around. Okay, so I think the absolute interior needs to have the oil. And then I do actually think that the outside needs the black because it's already started to bleed. So that sort of forced my hand there. So I'm going to try to gently soak some of that oil up. So yes, everything about this will be black except for the absolute inside of the box, which will be this deep, beautiful, sapele sort of red maroon. If this hasn't dried or become weird yet. Okay, this should be fine then. Okay, then very, very quickly, just gonna very lightly, very light coat
Make sure I get it down in there for complete coverage. Okay, so that's one. Then, tell you what, go ahead and write in the comments below the dumbest thing you ever did on a wood turning project. Bonus points if you're missing a digit and you can talk about how you did it. Okay. I do believe that that should just about cover us off there. All right, and then again, I'm just gonna try to pull it out of the threads if possible. Oh, well, that's just wiping it off, okay. We're not dead yet. Now that this has dried a little bit, I'm gonna apply a second exterior coat of the India ink because I just dulled it up pretty significantly with all of that denatured alcohol. Oop, okay, so I can't grab the interior, I gotta remember that. It has to be all on the outside. I'm just sort of dabbing with this little brush here. Yeah, but we're just gonna get it on the gloves so that we don't get it on the inside. And then when I get inside, I am gonna research lubricants for plastic threads. Also definitely gonna let this completely set up overnight. No more stickiness, please and thank you. Okay. I'm gonna let this cure probably overnight and then see where we are in the morning. Try to adjust the fit between these two. Whew. Been a long day. Alrighty. Let's check on the fit. Ooh, see, that's off. There we go. Okay, so that is a tight fit, but it can be undone. So this is officially more of an art piece than a practical box. Man, it's cold out here. I think I'm gonna take a couple of days of break on this one. I've been trying to figure out sort of the next thing to do on the outside, and I did gold leaf on the last one. And I sort of fell down a rabbit hole of variegated metallic leaf, so I'm looking at some of that. I might also try to add a splash of color to the outside here. I like the idea of like kind of an acid green or like a beetle green of some kind. I don't know, just something that makes you wonder, whose egg is this? Overall though, I'm pretty happy with how this thing has come along. So it'd be nice if it matched up like right there. I mean, it's still cool when it's offset, but yeah, this is right about where I would want the fit to be. And then, yeah, having to go all the way, that extra sort of clutch there. I'm gonna store this open.
So that's a lot of impromptu talking that I didn't anticipate having to do in the production of this video. That said, I am really happy with how this piece has turned out so far, and I have decided that I'm going to do a similar gilding treatment on the outside to the one that I did on this crazy bowl. If you haven't seen that video, please feel free to go and check that one out as well. Now here, I'm going to be using the same adhesive from the same gilding kit. I'll have a link to it in the description below. I don't think that it's anything too fancy, but it's been working pretty well for me. What I did add was some very, very fine-tipped brushes that are going to allow me to get really fine application of this adhesive onto some of these smaller dots. Now, my sort of ace in the hole for this project is I fell down an internet rabbit hole of different types of metallic leaf. I thought that maybe straight gold was a little bit boring, and I stumbled across this variegated metallic leaf. Basically, they just added a lot of blues and purples and other sort of colors. It gives sort of like a heat anodization effect that I really like. I think it's going to add a very cool color dimension to this piece. And I believe that somebody commented on the last video that I shouldn't be using the whole sheets and just stuffing them onto the outside of the egg. And I have learned from that comment, so I'm cutting very, very small bits so that I don't waste as much of this leaf as I did on the last bowl. Once I have all the little pieces cut and once the adhesive has tacked up just a little bit after about 30 minutes, I just start pressing the small squares of this variegated metallic leaf onto the adhesive dots. Now this seems like it would be a slightly more peaceful part of the process, but I'm definitely aware of the fact that this adhesive is curing as I'm doing this, so I need to move quickly. I'm using gloves to make sure that I'm not carrying small bits of the metal leaf. It can basically just turn into glitter on your fingertips, and then I find that the ridges in my finger will actually carry a lot more of it. So mostly the latex gloves aren't really to protect me from the adhesive. They're to make sure that it's a smooth surface that doesn't carry as much of the leaf from location to location. After I cover the entire bottom portion of the egg, then it's time to move on to the top. I decided to do the top in two portions. I did sort of the lower or more equatorial portion. Excuse the alarm, I'm supposed to be waking up my children right now, but I only have one shot to get this right, so I'm just going to forge ahead and we're all going to be a little bit late to daycare today. Anyhow, I'm basically doing the bottom portion of this egg first so that I can still grip the top of the egg, so that there won't be any adhesive up there that I can stick my grubby little fingers to. After getting all of the pieces of variegated metallic leaf set up, I start to brush away the excess using the soft brush provided in the kit linked in the description below. I am, of course, running my dust collector here because this stuff just turns into glitter, and based on the light that I have overhead, it tends to hang in the air a little bit. I just don't want to breathe a lot of it, so I'm using my dust collector right next to where I'm brushing off the excess leaf. From here, I just repeat the same process on the top of the egg. This way I'll be able to grip the bottom of the top of the egg without getting any adhesive on my fingers. I think you all get it now. Just about the same process. Find a small spot with a little bit of partially cured adhesive on it, slap some leaf on top of it, wait for it to cure, and then brush away the excess. Here we start to get some final looks at the egg. I'm really happy with how this one came out. I'm pretty happy with how I applied the adhesive. I like how tight the pattern is. I really like that one dot on top of the egg. I think it really sets it off. For all the panic this project caused me, I could not be happier to be going to Glamour Shots. you are still here, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. It helps the channel out quite a bit. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that like button and that subscribe button so you can see what I make next. Also be sure to follow the links in the description below to see my Instagram. Join up on the Discord so you can connect with other turners with similar interests. I'm Brad, this is Q Branch Woodworks. Thanks for watching.